The morning air over Wichita carried a thin veil of fog, softening the glow of the rising sun. The hum of traffic on Kellogg Avenue mixed with the faint chatter of a local radio host talking about weekend storms. It was May 4th, 1998, a Monday like any other, or so everyone thought. Dana Brooks adjusted the strap of her purse, balancing a travel mug of coffee and her car keys. She was 27, with a steady job at a local insurance agency downtown, and a 5-year-old son who adored her. Her life wasn't glamorous, but it was grounded in rhythm. Morning routines, bedtime stories, bills, laughter, and the quiet strength that came with single motherhood. "Come on, Tyler, shoes," she said, crouching to tie his laces. Her mother, Evelyn, waited by the door, wrapped in her housecoat, a familiar presence every morning before Dana's drive to work. "You sure you don't want breakfast first?" Evelyn asked. "I'll grab something on the way," Dana replied with a smile. "Promise." She kissed her son's forehead, waved at her mother, and stepped into the cool Kansas air. The smell of damp earth and gasoline filled the driveway as she climbed into her silver Honda Civic. That was the last time anyone saw her alive. Later that afternoon, when Dana didn't show up to pick Tyler up from kindergarten, Evelyn's chest tightened with the kind of dread only a mother knows. She called the office. They said Dana hadn't come in at all. By early evening, the police had been notified. A sheriff's deputy found Dana's car parked outside a roadside diner off Highway 54, the driver's door locked, keys missing. Inside the car sat her purse, neatly placed on the passenger seat. The coffee mug was still half full, lukewarm. No signs of a struggle, no footprints in the dirt nearby. "Maybe she left with someone she knew," the deputy said, his tone cautious, but Evelyn shook her head. "Dana wouldn't just leave. Not like that." The Wichita community reacted swiftly. Flyers appeared in grocery stores, gas stations, church bulletin boards. Strangers offered to help search the riverbanks and empty fields. Volunteers gathered with flashlights and hope, refusing to believe that Dana Brooks had simply vanished. By nightfall, the fog had rolled back in, covering the edges of the fields in silence. The city's hum faded, replaced by the uneasy awareness that something terrible had settled among them. Neighbors spoke in hushed tones, mothers held their children tighter, and every passing car seemed to carry a whisper. Where did she go? Stories like Dana's have a way of fading into the noise of time, unless we keep them alive. If you believe every missing voice deserves to be heard, make sure to subscribe, because what happens next will show just how far one community will go to find the truth. Morning light spilled over Wichita the day after Dana Brooks vanished, but for her family, time had already stopped. Evelyn Brooks stood in her kitchen, the smell of burnt coffee filling the air, phone pressed to her ear as she repeated the same question to yet another officer. "Have you found her car, her purse? Anything?" Detective Frank Delaney, a seasoned investigator with 30 years on the force, arrived at the Brooks residence before noon. His manner was calm, deliberate, someone used to walking into heartbreak. He sat across from Evelyn, notebook in hand. "When was the last time you heard from your daughter?" he asked. "Yesterday morning. She called after dropping Tyler off. Said she'd be home for dinner," Delaney wrote slowly. "Any reason she might have gone somewhere unexpectedly?" Evelyn shook her head. "Dana's not that kind of person. She's steady, reliable." Her voice cracked. "She has a little boy. She wouldn't just leave him." By afternoon, volunteers began gathering at a nearby church parking lot where flyers with Dana's smiling photo were printed in stacks. Her co-worker, Susan Harper, stood by the folding tables organizing search groups. "She always took Highway 54 to work," Susan told reporters. "That's where we'll start." Wichita police deployed patrol cars along the stretch between downtown and Goddard. Helicopters scanned open fields, while officers combed through drainage ditches and wooded areas along the Arkansas River. News vans crowded the shoulders, broadcasting live updates that echoed through living rooms across Sedgwick County. Neighbors remembered seeing Dana that morning at the Quick Trip gas station. "She looked fine," one man said, smiled, paid for her coffee, drove off like usual. But no one saw where she went next. The uncertainty gnawed at everyone. At the elementary school, teachers whispered in the hallway as Tyler waited by the classroom door, backpack still on his shoulders. Evelyn arrived late, eyes swollen, unable to hide the tremor in her hands as she knelt beside him. "Mommy's just taking a little longer today," she whispered. "She'll be home soon." By sunset, the sheriff's department had declared a full-scale search. Flashlights cut through the prairie dusk, illuminating fields of waist-high grass. The only sounds were the buzz of insects and the distant call of searchers shouting Dana's name. Delaney stood near the diner where her car had been found. The faint glow of neon lights flickered against the windshield. He opened his notebook again, studying his notes. Purse in car, keys missing, no struggle. His instincts told him something didn't fit. People don't vanish without a trace, not here, not in Wichita. As midnight approached, rain began to fall, washing away footprints and hope alike. The volunteers dispersed, promising to return at first light. Evelyn stayed by the phone, refusing to sleep, while Delaney made a silent vow. He would not let this case fade into another cold file. But as the second day ended with no answers, the first threads of doubt began to unravel. Days passed, and the search for Dana Brooks began to shift from urgent to uncertain. What had started with optimism now hung in the air like a storm that refused to break. Wichita, once a city of quiet neighborhoods and church picnics, buzzed with whispers. Everyone knew her name, and everyone had a theory. Detective Frank Delaney sat in his office at the downtown precinct, surrounded by stacks of flyers and photographs. The tip line had been ringing non-stop. Most calls led nowhere. Strangers claiming sightings, rumors about strange cars, and the usual noise that followed any missing person case. But one message from a co-worker caught his attention. Her supervisor at the insurance agency, Richard Lane, had told police that Dana seemed distracted the week before she disappeared. She'd been arguing on the phone, he said something about needing space. When asked if he knew who she was speaking to, Lane shrugged. Maybe her ex-husband. Maybe someone else. By late afternoon, Delaney found himself parked outside Mark Brooks's small duplex on the city's west side. Mark opened the door halfway, wearing a faded Wichita State sweatshirt, his eyes bloodshot. "I already told the other officers everything," he said. Delaney nodded. "I just want to confirm a few details. You and Dana, how were things between you two?" Mark hesitated. "We were fine. Divorced, sure, but we talked. I see Tyler every weekend. She wasn't seeing anyone else, if that's what you're implying." Delaney's gaze stayed steady. "Anyone who might have wanted to hurt her?" Mark's jaw tightened. "You think I did something?" "I think she's missing," Delaney said quietly, "and I think people don't just vanish." The silence that followed was thick, uneasy. Mark looked away first. Back at the station, the department's conference room buzzed with the dull hum of fluorescent lights. Detectives reviewed every known detail, but the evidence led in circles. There were no signs of struggle, no witnesses, no financial activity on Dana's accounts. Meanwhile, the story spread across local news networks. Reporters stood in front of the diner off Highway 54, their voices measured but urgent. Authorities say foul play has not been ruled out. At grocery stores and gas pumps, strangers murmured. Some claimed Dana had been involved with her boss. Others said she was planning to move out of state. Small-town gossip filled the gaps that truth had left empty. Evelyn avoided the news altogether. She spent her evenings by the window, watching the streetlights flicker across the cul-de-sac. Every sound outside, a car door, a barking dog, made her heart jump. Tyler, too young to understand, asked one night, "Grandma, why doesn't Mommy call anymore?" Evelyn's only answer was a trembling hug. Delaney stayed long after his shift ended, staring at the map on the wall. Red pins marked every search area, every sighting, every dead end. Somewhere in those lines was the answer, buried under silence and lies. And as Wichita's lights dimmed under the weight of rumor and fear, Delaney knew one thing for certain. Someone out there was keeping a secret. A week had passed since Dana Brooks disappeared, and Wichita was beginning to lose faith in answers. The early waves of volunteers had dwindled, and the search lines grew thinner each day. What remained was the quiet persistence of Detective Frank Delaney, moving through the motions like a man chasing a shadow he couldn't catch. That morning, a call came from a farmer west of the city. He'd noticed something odd near the Arkansas River, tire tracks leading down a dirt trail that hadn't been used in years. Delaney and his partner drove out before sunrise. The mist hung low over the water, and the air smelled of mud and decaying leaves. Near the riverbank, they found faint impressions in the soil, footprints that seemed to start and stop without direction. The rain had washed most of them away, but Delaney crouched low, brushing the ground with his hand. "Too small for a man," he murmured. "Could be her." The forensics team arrived within the hour, photographing every inch before the evidence faded completely. They found a small piece of fabric tangled in the weeds, pale blue, like the blouse Dana was last seen wearing. Evelyn confirmed it later that afternoon. It was hers. The discovery reignited the search. Boats swept the river, divers scoured the shallows, and volunteers combed through miles of tangled brush. The water was cold and fast-moving, carrying away both clues and hope. Delaney remained by the banks as daylight faded, his jacket soaked through. He couldn't shake the feeling that the scene was staged, that someone had left just enough behind to mislead them. Back at the precinct, the evidence board filled with photographs and maps. Red strings connected locations, timelines, and names. Still, there was no suspect, no clear motive, no body. That night, Delaney stopped by the Brooks home. The house was dimly lit, the walls lined with framed photos of Dana smiling beside her son. Evelyn opened the door slowly, exhaustion written across her face. "Did you find anything?" she asked. "Not yet," Delaney admitted. "We found some fabric by the river. We're testing it." Her hands trembled as she pressed them together. "I keep thinking maybe she's still out there. Maybe she's hurt somewhere." Delaney hesitated before replying. "We're not giving up." Evelyn nodded but didn't speak again. Tyler's laughter echoed faintly from the living room, innocent, unaware. Driving home, Delaney couldn't shake her words. He'd seen dozens of disappearances in his career, and he knew the statistics. Still, something about this case felt unfinished, as if the truth was hidden in plain sight. He returned to his desk, opened the file again, and stared at the photograph of Dana standing in front of a church bake sale, her smile wide and unguarded. "What were you running from?" he whispered. Outside, Wichita slept under a blanket of heavy clouds. The city's hum softened to stillness, and in that silence Delaney felt it again, the presence of something just beyond reach. The river had given them footprints. Now it seemed to mock them with silence. By late summer, the posters bearing Dana Brooks's face had begun to fade in the Kansas sun. Rain had streaked the ink, and tape peeled away from telephone poles. Wichita, a city that once pulsed with the urgency of the search, was returning to routine, but for the Brooks family, time stood painfully still. Evelyn still rose before dawn, brewing coffee for a daughter who never came home. Her mornings began the same way. She'd stand by the kitchen window, scanning the empty driveway. Some days she thought she heard a car pull in, only to realize it was the neighbor starting his engine. Hope had become both a comfort and a curse. Tyler, now 6, asked fewer questions. Instead, he kept a small photo of Dana in his backpack, showing it to his teacher on quiet days. "That's my mom," he'd say softly. "She's coming back soon." His innocence protected him from the truth, at least for now. Detective Frank Delaney tried to keep the case alive. Every week, he revisited the evidence, rechecked phone records, and chased any rumor that surfaced. But by the 6-month mark, official momentum had faded. The police department shifted resources to newer cases, and Delaney's captain told him plainly, "Frank, you've done what you can. Sometimes they don't want to be found." He didn't believe that, not for a second. In October, he drove out to the river again, parking near the same bend where the footprints had been found. The water had receded, leaving behind cracked mud and fragments of driftwood. Delaney walked along the edge, his hands buried in his coat pockets, his breath visible in the cold. He spoke softly, as if Dana could somehow hear him. "I'm not done looking." That evening, he stopped by the Brooks house once more. Evelyn greeted him with tired eyes but invited him in. They sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by the smell of overbrewed coffee and the hum of the refrigerator. "She would have called me," Evelyn said. "Even if she was in trouble, she would have called." "I know," Delaney replied. "People don't just disappear without help." Evelyn studied his face. "Do you think she's gone?" Delaney hesitated. "I think someone didn't want her found." Her eyes filled, but she nodded as though she'd already known. As the years passed, the Brooks case slipped quietly into the archives. The file was boxed, labeled, and shelved among hundreds of others in a storage room beneath the precinct. Delaney transferred divisions shortly after, carrying the weight of unfinished business wherever he went. For Evelyn, grief settled into the corners of her life like dust. Birthdays, holidays, the first day of school, each one marked by an empty chair and a lingering ache. She stopped setting a place for Dana at dinner, but never stopped waiting for the sound of her voice. And somewhere in Wichita, beneath the hum of ordinary life, the name Dana Brooks still lingered, a whisper that refused to fade. 2 decades can change the face of a city, but not the weight of its ghosts. Wichita in 2018 was bigger, faster, filled with new buildings and new faces. But for some, the past hadn't gone anywhere. The name Dana Brooks still carried a quiet echo, one that lingered in police files and in the memories of those who had tried and failed to bring her home. Detective Lena Carter was 32, sharp-minded, relentless, and part of a new generation trained to rely on data more than instinct. She'd joined the Wichita Police Department's cold case unit 6 months earlier, a department revived after years of inactivity. Boxes of forgotten evidence lined the shelves, each marked by faded case numbers. When she pulled file 984217, Dana M. Brooks, missing person, she felt the old dust cling to her fingers. Inside were photographs, transcripts, and worn pages that smelled faintly of cigarette smoke. She flipped through the first report. Vehicle recovered, purse intact, no sign of struggle. Then, stapled to the back, a note from Detective Frank Delaney, dated October 1998. In small, neat handwriting, he'd written, "I don't believe she left on her own." That line stuck with her. Lena sat back, scanning the photos of Dana, a young woman with soft eyes and a smile that didn't seem to belong in a police file. She read through every interview, every false lead, every dead end. Something about the case felt incomplete, as if a crucial piece had been overlooked. Later that afternoon, she walked into the evidence archive, a cold, windowless room humming with the low buzz of fluorescent lights. Inside a sealed box, she found the recovered items: Dana's blouse, a broken keychain, strands of hair sealed in outdated plastic sleeves. Most of it was useless by modern standards, but not all. DNA technology had evolved since 1998. Samples once considered too degraded could now yield matches. Lena filled out a requisition form and sent the items for reanalysis. As she did, she couldn't shake a quiet thrill, the sense that for the first time in 20 years, this case might finally move. That evening, she visited Evelyn Brooks, now in her 70s, and living in a small assisted living apartment near the edge of town. Evelyn recognized the badge before the name. "You're not here to tell me you found her, are you?" she asked softly. "Not yet," Lena said, "but I think we might find out what happened." Evelyn's eyes filled with tears. "They said that before. Every time someone new came around, I let myself believe, but belief's a dangerous thing, Detective." Lena nodded. So is silence. Outside, as the sun set behind the grain elevators, Lena looked out across the city. Wichita had grown, but its shadows hadn't disappeared. Somewhere in those streets, in the spaces between memory and evidence, was the truth about Dana Brooks. And for the first time in 2 decades, someone was finally listening again. Detective Lena Carter spent her next week buried in the old Brooks files. The handwriting, the tone of the reports, the cautious phrasing of witnesses, all of it told her one thing: people had been holding something back. The case wasn't just cold. It was buried. She started with the old interview logs. Some names were crossed out, others missing entirely. When she requested the original notes from 1998, the clerk frowned. "Some of those files were never digitized," he said. "We might not have everything." But Lena didn't accept might. She tracked down the retired detective, Frank Delaney, now living in a quiet neighborhood outside Wichita. His gray hair was thin, his voice slower, but the name Dana Brooks brought a sharpness back to his eyes. "I always knew someone would come asking," he said, gesturing for her to sit. "It never sat right with me. No body, no suspect, just silence. Like the case disappeared on purpose." "What do you mean?" Lena asked. Delaney leaned back, his gaze distant. "The ex-husband had an alibi. So did her boss. But there was something off about the timeline. I remember calling dispatch for follow-ups, but certain logs went missing afterward. Never got a straight answer why. Could they have been misplaced?" He smiled faintly. "In theory, but I'd been around long enough to know when someone's cleaning up loose ends." Lena left his home with more questions than answers. That night, she reopened the caseboard in her office, pinning every name she could recover from the old reports. Mark Brooks, the ex-husband; Richard Lane, the boss; co-workers, neighbors, friends. One name in particular stood out, appearing in an early report and then vanishing from all later files: Tom Ritter. According to the initial notes, Ritter had been interviewed briefly as a friendly neighbor who once helped Dana fix a flat tire. Nothing suspicious. Yet his address sat just 3 houses away from where Dana grew up. Lena circled the name in red ink. The next morning, she pulled his background record. Ritter still lived in Kansas, now retired. with no criminal history beyond a few speeding tickets. His file was ordinary, too ordinary. Before following up, Lena visited Evelyn Brooks again. She brought copies of the old witness list. Evelyn's eyes scanned the paper slowly, then stopped. Her hand trembled slightly. "Tom Ritter," she whispered. "He used to come by to help with yard work after my husband died. Always polite. But Dana didn't like him being around when I wasn't home." Lena's pulse quickened. "Did she ever tell you why?" Evelyn hesitated, then shook her head. "She said he made her uncomfortable, that's all. I told her she was overreacting. God forgive me, I told her that." When Lena left the apartment, the Kansas wind carried the faint scent of rain and dust. She knew she'd just uncovered something that had been overlooked for 2 decades. For the first time since reopening the file, she felt the case beginning to breathe again. The DNA results arrived on a gray Wednesday morning. Detective Lena Carter sat at her desk, coffee untouched, when the lab technician knocked and handed her a sealed envelope. She'd been waiting weeks for it, hoping that the reanalysis of evidence from 1998 would yield something the old technology had missed. She opened it carefully. The report was brief but devastatingly clear. A partial DNA profile recovered from a strand of hair found inside Dana Brooks's car matched one in the national database. The name beside the result froze her breath. Thomas Ritter. Lena read it twice, then a third time, as the noise of the precinct faded into silence around her. Ritter, the polite neighbor everyone trusted. The man who'd lived just 3 houses down from Dana's childhood home. The one who'd slipped quietly through the cracks for 20 years. She called the lab to confirm. "Are you sure about the match?" 17, loci confirmed. The analyst said. "It's solid. The odds of error are near 0. When she hung up, Lena sat for a moment, staring at the case file spread across her desk. The pieces began to align in her mind. The missing logs, the unexplained gaps in the original investigation, the subtle familiarity Ritter had with Dana's family. It was as if he had been hiding in plain sight, protected by the simplicity of small-town trust. She pulled his record again. Ritter was 70 now, retired from his job at an auto repair shop. He'd lived quietly in a rural suburb outside Wichita, attending the same church for decades. His life was unremarkable, exactly what made him so dangerous. That afternoon, Lena presented her findings to Captain Ruiz, the head of the cold case unit. He leaned back in his chair, brow furrowed. "You're telling me this man was never even considered a suspect?" "Not seriously," Lena replied. "He was interviewed once and dismissed as a helpful neighbor. No background check, no follow-up." Ruiz exhaled. "You realize what reopening this will mean? Paperwork, press, the mayor's office breathing down my neck." "I don't care about the politics," Lena said. "I care about the truth." He studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Run it quiet for now. Get confirmation from a secondary lab. If it holds, we move forward." That night, Lena drove past Ritter's address. His small brick house sat at the end of a gravel road, porch light glowing faintly against the dusk. She watched for a moment, noting the old pickup truck parked out front, the neatly trimmed lawn, the faint sound of a television through the open window. Ordinary, peaceful, but she could feel it, the weight of secrets lingering beneath the stillness. As she turned the car around, rain began to fall, streaking her windshield. She gripped the steering wheel, her pulse steady, but her thoughts racing. For 2 decades, the Brooks family had lived without answers. Now the evidence whispered a name from the past, a name that could finally shatter the silence. Detective Lena Carter sat in the dim light of her office long after everyone else had gone home. The building was quiet, except for the low hum of the air conditioner and the faint creak of old pipes. She stared at the folder marked Brooks, Dana M. The DNA report lay on top, undeniable proof connecting Thomas Ritter to the missing woman's car. Yet something about the original investigation still didn't sit right. She opened the older files again. The 1998 reports were sloppy, pages missing, interviews summarized in vague language. One entry caught her attention. A request for a follow-up with Ritter had been stamped completed, but contained no transcript, no signature, no audio record. It was as if the interview had never actually happened. The next morning, Lena brought the issue to Captain Ruiz. "Somebody either cut corners or covered something up," she said, sliding the papers across his desk. Ruiz frowned. "We can't accuse our own department without proof." "Then let's find it," Lena said. "There's more buried in those archives. I can feel it." He gave a weary nod. "Fine. Quietly, no leaks, no press. Hours later, Lena was deep in the storage basement, surrounded by rows of dusty boxes and fading evidence tags. The air smelled of old paper and mildew. She pulled every record tied to the Brooks case, one by one, stacking them on the floor until she found a small manila envelope marked with an outdated evidence number. Inside were photographs that had never appeared in the main file. Close-ups of tire impressions near the diner where Dana's car had been found. One set of tracks didn't match her vehicle or any searches logged that day. The treads were worn unevenly, distinctive enough to identify. The date stamped on the photos matched the week Ritter had reported his old pickup stolen, a report that had been quietly dismissed and forgotten. Lena's pulse quickened. She knew what it meant. Ritter's vehicle had been there. Later that afternoon, she visited Evelyn Brooks once more. The elderly woman sat wrapped in a knitted shawl, her eyes tired but alert. "I thought you said there wasn't anything new," Evelyn said. "There wasn't," Lena replied softly, "but there is now. I can't share details yet, but we're getting closer." Evelyn's hands trembled slightly. "It's been 20 years, Detective. I don't even know what justice looks like anymore." "Sometimes," Lena said, "it just means the truth finally gets a voice." Before leaving, Evelyn paused by the window. "Ritter used to wave at me when I walked Tyler to school. Every single morning. I never thought—" Her words broke into silence. Driving back to headquarters, Lena couldn't shake the chill in her chest. Someone, years ago, had let Ritter slip through untouched. Whether it was neglect or protection, she didn't yet know. But one thing was clear: the ghosts haunting this file weren't just the victims, they were the mistakes, the omissions, and the quiet hands that had buried the truth. The knock on Thomas Ritter's door came just after noon. Detective Lena Carter stood on the front porch, badge visible, her expression calm but unyielding. Behind her, autumn leaves stirred across the gravel drive. Ritter opened the door slowly, surprise flickering in his pale blue eyes. "Can I help you, officer?" His voice was steady, almost too casual. "Detective Carter," she corrected. "I'm revisiting an old case. Dana Brooks. You remember her?" He hesitated. "Of course. Terrible thing. What happened to that young woman? Never did find her, right?" Lena nodded slightly. "That's why I'm here." He motioned toward the porch chairs. "You want to come in?" She declined. "This won't take long." For the next 20 minutes, Lena asked about 1998, the day Dana disappeared, the search, his supposed stolen truck. Ritter's answers were rehearsed, each one clipped and cautious. He avoided eye contact when the questions cut too close. "You reported your vehicle stolen 2 days after Dana went missing," Lena said. "Where exactly was it stolen from?" "Outside my shop," he replied. "Middle of the day. Keys inside, I guess someone took their chance." "No police report mentioned a break-in," Lena pressed. "And the responding officer noted no signs of forced entry." Ritter shrugged. "Guess I was careless." Lena leaned slightly forward. "The thing is, we found tire impressions from that same model truck near where Dana's car was discovered, and the DNA recovered from inside her vehicle, it matches yours." The air between them went still. Ritter's face didn't change immediately, but a faint twitch crossed his jaw. "That's impossible," he said quietly. "I never stepped foot in her car. Evidence says otherwise." He met her eyes now, his expression sharpening. "You think after 20 years, you can just show up here and rewrite history? I've lived in this town my whole life, Detective. People know me." Lena's voice remained even. "People thought they knew Dana too." Ritter's hands gripped the armrest of his chair. For a moment his calm facade cracked. "I told the police everything back then. If they didn't find anything, that's on them, not me." Lena took a slow breath, watching the flicker of anger beneath his composure. "We'll be re-examining all the evidence, Mr. Ritter. You'll be hearing from us again." As she turned to leave, his voice followed her low and hard. "You dig too deep, Detective. You'll find trouble that's better left buried." She paused but didn't look back. That's the thing about buried truth. It doesn't stay quiet forever. Back in her car, Lena exhaled, hands tight around the steering wheel. Her instincts screamed that he was hiding something. The veneer of innocence he'd worn for decades had cracked, just enough to reveal the darkness underneath. For the first time, she could feel the case shifting, something alive, breathing again after years of silence. And somewhere deep inside, she knew the confrontation had only just begun. Days after her tense conversation with Thomas Ritter, Detective Lena Carter couldn't shake the unease that lingered in her mind. Every answer he gave had sounded rehearsed, every denial too polished. She'd spent years reading people, and Ritter's calm had been a mask, one he'd worn for decades. Back at the precinct, she submitted a request for a search warrant. It wasn't easy. With the case so old, the judge demanded irrefutable justification. Lena leaned on the DNA evidence, the missing interview transcripts, and the photographs linking Ritter's vehicle to the diner site. Captain Ruiz signed off on the paperwork, and the warrant was approved 48 hours later. Early that Friday morning, a small team accompanied Lena to Ritter's property. The wind carried the scent of damp earth, and the ground was soft from recent rain. Ritter wasn't home, his truck was gone, but the officers began their quiet inspection. They started in the garage, where the walls were lined with old tools, oil cans, and boxes of car parts dating back decades. In the far corner, beneath a tarp, they found something unexpected: a dented metal toolbox filled with odds and ends, screws, broken keychains, a woman's earring. Lena's breath caught as she lifted the small silver earring. It matched the pair Dana Brooks had been wearing in one of her missing person photos. The team carefully bagged the evidence and continued searching. Behind the garage, buried beneath a layer of gravel and soil, the cadaver dogs began to bark. Officers moved quickly, clearing the area. Lena crouched as the ground was carefully brushed away. What emerged wasn't a body, but a fragment of fabric, faded blue, torn and clinging to the dirt. Another piece of Dana's blouse. Hours later, Ritter returned home to find patrol cars and evidence units surrounding his property. His calm demeanor cracked for the first time. "What the hell is this?" he demanded. Lena approached him, holding the warrant. "We're conducting a lawful search, Mr. Ritter. We found items linked to the Brooks case." Ritter's face went pale. "That's ridiculous. I don't know how anything of hers would end up here." "You will," Lena said evenly. "You'll have a chance to explain it downtown." As the cuffs clicked around his wrists, he glared at her with a cold, restrained fury. "You don't understand what you're doing," he hissed. "You think you're chasing justice, but you're just digging up old lies." "Then the truth should clear you," Lena replied. At the station, the evidence was logged, photographed and catalogued. Forensics confirmed that the earring and fabric both contained trace DNA matching Dana Brooks. It was the break the case had been waiting for. Solid, physical proof connecting Ritter to her disappearance. That night, Lena sat in her office staring at the board filled with photographs and maps. After 20 years of silence, the pieces were finally aligning. Somewhere in the darkness, the truth had waited patiently, and now, after decades of shadows, it was ready to be seen. The courthouse buzzed with quiet tension on the first morning of the trial. 2 decades after Dana Brooks vanished, Thomas Ritter finally sat at the defendant's table, his face drawn but composed. The man who had once blended effortlessly into the rhythm of Wichita life now looked small beneath the fluorescent lights, his gray hair combed neatly, his eyes fixed on the floor. Detective Lena Carter sat behind the prosecution, her hands clasped tightly. For months she had relived every detail of the case, the DNA match, the unearthed evidence, the endless hours of interviews. Yet now, as the trial began, she understood that justice wasn't about what she felt. It was about what she could prove. The prosecutor, Assistant District Attorney Paul Winters, opened with deliberate calm. "For 20 years, Dana Brooks's family has lived without answers," he said to the jury. "Today you will hear how one man, someone they trusted, took those answers from them." Across the room, Ritter's attorney, a polished man named David Klein, countered with precision. "The evidence is circumstantial," he argued. "No body, no weapon, no eyewitness. My client's life is being destroyed by speculation and degraded samples from a time when DNA testing was unreliable." The courtroom divided, half filled with reporters and spectators, half with the quiet faces of Dana's family. Evelyn Brooks sat beside her grown grandson, Tyler, now a man in his late 20s. His expression was stoic, but his eyes betrayed the storm beneath. When Lena was called to testify, she rose slowly, steadying her breath. The questioning began with procedure, the reopening of the cold case, the forensic reanalysis, the sequence that led to Ritter's arrest. "Detective Carter," Winters asked, "in your professional opinion, was there any plausible explanation for Mr. Ritter's DNA being found inside Dana Brooks's vehicle?" "No," she said firmly. "None that doesn't involve direct contact. The car was sealed for evidence in 1998. There was no contamination. Klein's cross-examination was sharp. "Detective, are you aware that the vehicle was stored for over a decade? How can you be certain that chain of custody wasn't compromised?" Lena met his gaze without flinching. "Because I checked every signature, every transfer. I wouldn't be standing here if I wasn't sure." Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. As the trial continued, the jury heard Evelyn's trembling testimony, the forensic expert's technical breakdowns, and the haunting audio of Ritter's police interview. The hesitation, the anger, the slip of words when he referred to Dana in the past tense. By the time closing arguments began, the courtroom air felt heavy, as if history itself was watching. Winters ended his statement with quiet conviction. "This case is not about time. It's about truth, and truth doesn't expire." When the gavel struck for recess, Evelyn leaned against Tyler, whispering, "She's finally being heard." Lena stood near the back, looking at the man in handcuffs. For 20 years his silence had been power. Now it was just another piece of evidence. The jury deliberated for nearly 8 hours. Outside the courthouse, news vans lined the street, their antennas cutting through the gray Kansas sky. For the people of Wichita, the name Dana Brooks had become more than a case. It was a wound that had never healed. Now, after 2 decades, the city held its breath. Inside the courtroom, the air was thick with anticipation. Thomas Ritter sat motionless at the defense table, hands folded neatly, his eyes fixed on the empty space before him. He hadn't spoken since taking the stand, a brief calculated testimony in which he denied everything. His composure now was unnerving, a stillness that seemed to dare the world to move against him. Detective Lena Carter sat behind the prosecution, her expression controlled but tense. She'd replayed the evidence in her mind 100 times, the DNA match, the tire tracks, the earring, the slip in Ritter's interview. Yet in the quiet moments before the verdict, she couldn't help but feel the weight of uncertainty. Justice wasn't guaranteed. The door to the jury room opened. 12 people filed in, faces unreadable. The foreman, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes, held a folded paper in her hand. The clerk accepted it and passed it to the judge. "All rise." The judge adjusted his glasses and read aloud, his voice steady. "On the charge of second-degree murder in the disappearance of Dana Brooks, we, the jury, find the defendant, Thomas Ritter, guilty." The sound rippled through the courtroom like a breaking wave. Ritter's head snapped up, disbelief flashing across his face. Evelyn Brooks gasped softly, her hand gripping her grandson's. Tyler's eyes filled with tears, not of triumph but of release. 20 years of wondering finally given shape. Ritter muttered something under his breath, his composure shattering as deputies moved toward him. "You can't prove anything. You're all wrong." His voice cracked, desperation replacing arrogance. The judge struck the gavel once. Order in the court. Evelyn turned toward Lena, her voice trembling. "You found her truth," she whispered. Lena nodded gently. "We found justice, Mrs. Brooks. That's what she deserved." The sentencing came swiftly. Life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The judge's words echoed through the courtroom, final and heavy. When the hearing adjourned, reporters flooded the hallway, microphones raised, questions flying. But Lena stayed behind, watching as the deputies led Ritter away in cuffs. His face had gone blank again, the fury replaced by emptiness. She wondered if he finally understood what he'd taken, and what could never be undone. Outside, the afternoon sun broke through the clouds. Evelyn stood with Tyler near the courthouse steps, her frail hand resting on his arm. "I thought I'd never see this day," she said softly. Tyler looked toward the horizon, voice low. "Neither did I." Lena joined them briefly. For a long moment, none of them spoke. The noise of the reporters faded into the distance, replaced by the quiet hum of the city that had waited so long to exhale. After 20 years, Wichita finally had its answer. Months had passed since the verdict, and Wichita had begun to settle back into its steady rhythm. Yet for those closest to the case, peace came slowly, like a wound closing from the inside out. The Brooks family, after 20 long years, could finally speak of Dana without the sharp sting of uncertainty. Evelyn Brooks moved into a smaller apartment closer to her church. Her days were quiet now, spent tending to a collection of potted plants on her balcony. Sometimes she'd catch herself glancing at the road below, expecting to see Dana's car turning the corner. But grief had changed shape. It no longer roared, it whispered. One afternoon, she received a visit from Detective Lena Carter. Evelyn greeted her with a frail but genuine smile. You didn't have to come all the way out here, she said. I wanted to, Lena replied. I thought you'd like to know. The department's closing the file officially next week. But before that, I wanted to bring you something. She handed Evelyn a sealed envelope. Inside was a copy of the case summary, the final report, signed and stamped. So it's finished, Evelyn murmured. Lena nodded softly. At least on paper. Evelyn studied her for a long moment, her voice quiet. You did what no one else could. You gave her back her name. Lena felt the weight of the words. She never really lost it, Mom. We just had to listen long enough to find it again. Later that evening, Evelyn lit a candle beside a framed photograph of Dana, the same one used in the missing posters years ago. She whispered a prayer, not for justice, but for rest. Outside, the Kansas wind carried the faint sound of church bells. Across town, Tyler visited the memorial near the river, where the community had built a small stone marker in Dana's memory. He placed a single white flower at its base and sat quietly. The water glimmered in the late sunlight, moving gently, endlessly forward. Hey, Mom, he said under his breath. We did it. It took a while, but we found him. We found the truth. His voice faltered. I wish you could have seen it. Behind him, life moved on. Families walking dogs, children laughing by the park. Wichita no longer felt haunted, but changed, as though a chapter had finally closed. That night, Lena stood on her porch, watching the horizon burn orange and pink. She thought of Evelyn's strength, of Tyler's quiet resilience, of all the unanswered stories that still filled the shelves of the cold case room. Justice had come late for Dana Brooks, but it had come, and sometimes that was all the world allowed, a fragment of truth reclaimed from silence. As the last light faded, Lena whispered to herself, some endings aren't about closure. They're about beginning again. In Wichita, the city exhaled. For the first time in 20 years, the Brooks family could finally breathe. Spring returned to Kansas with a quiet gentleness, washing the city in color and light. For most people in Wichita, the story of Dana Brooks had already begun to fade into history, just another headline turned memory. But for the few who had carried her name for decades, the echoes of her absence still lingered in the spaces between their days. Detective Lena Carter visited the small memorial by the river one last time before the case file was archived. The plaque read simply, "In memory of Dana Brooks, gone but never forgotten." She traced her fingers over the engraved letters, feeling the weight of all that had been lost and all that had been found. Frank Delaney had once stood in this same place years earlier, chasing the same truth. She wished he could see it now. The case finally closed. Justice delivered. But even as she thought it, she knew closure was a complicated word. Behind her, footsteps crunched over gravel. Tyler approached, hands in his pockets, eyes distant. I still come here sometimes, he said quietly. I don't even know why. It's not like she's here. She's everywhere you remember her, Lena replied. He nodded, a faint smile crossing his face. Grandma says you're the reason we finally know. She wanted to thank you again. Lena shook her head. Your grandmother's the reason I didn't stop looking. She never gave up. They stood in silence for a moment, watching the river move. The water carried pieces of sunlight like fragments of gold. Tyler exhaled slowly. I used to think justice meant things would feel better, but it doesn't. It just means you can stop asking questions. That's what justice really is, Lena said. The chance to stop asking. He looked at her, searching for something in her expression. You'll keep doing this, the cold cases? As long as there's truth left to find, she said. When he left, Lena remained by the river, the sound of his footsteps fading into the distance. The wind shifted through the reeds, carrying with it the faint hum of traffic from the nearby bridge, the same bridge that had once marked the last trace of Dana Brooks. She thought of Evelyn lighting her candle each night, and of Ritter serving out his sentence in a sterile cell, surrounded by the silence he had tried to impose on others. Some stories end with resolution, Lena thought. Others end with reflection. Dana's had both. As dusk fell, the city lights flickered to life one by one. Wichita breathed again, neither haunted nor healed, but changed. Its people reminded that even the smallest truths could survive decades of silence. Lena turned to leave, her voice low, carried by the wind. Rest easy, Dana. You're home now. And as the screen fades, the narrator's voice returns. When stories like Dana's are told, they remind us that justice is not about revenge, it's about remembrance. If you believe every voice deserves to be heard, subscribe and keep listening. Because silence only wins when we stop paying attention.